Jean-Baptiste Avia, and so my talk is writing a C-Python extension in 2017. So I'm CTO at Screen.io. Former hacker, I was working at the Apple Red team, so attacking internal systems, lots of reverse engineering. And I'm one of the authors of PyMini Racer. The other one is in the room. Yeah, thank you, Boris. And so you can reach me on these handles, Twitter and email. So just in a word, Screen is a company who is building an application security solution, which is very simple. So at Screen, someday, we needed to use V8 from Python. All right, that was our use case. This is what I'm gonna use as an example to how we chose to build a Python extension today. So okay, came back. Yes. So what is V8? I think you all know that's the JavaScript engine you have in Chrome, the Google browser. So it's a piece of code that is extremely performant, stable, tested. It's a high quality piece of code, extremely secure, which is extremely important to us. So it was the main reason we wanted to go in this direction. All right. So the thing we ship, it's public, so everyone can just pip install Screen. It's widely used. We have a bunch of customers, and the setup needs to be frictionless. All right, because all of our users need to be able to very simply install Screen. We don't want them to mess around and to have a complicated experience while they install Screen. So what I'm going to discuss during this presentation is all the choices we have made in order to achieve this result. Okay, this result is very particular. It's what we needed for our product, for our clients. All right, it may obviously not be the same thing for any of you. This is our use case. So V8, our goal was to run JavaScript into Python, right? So to you, Python guys, yeah, that's a bit like that. I know I'm discussing about JavaScript to you guys. I'm sorry, but there are great things about JavaScript. Anyway, let's just assume for this presentation that we needed to run JavaScript in our Python, all right? So why did we need a Python extension? I'm gonna start explaining that. The available choices you have as Python developer. I'm also gonna explain this. Then how you build and debug your extension if you need to debug it. And obviously how we ship it and how we make it available to our customers. So PyMini Racer, okay, just in a word that you know what we're talking about. That's a cool JavaScript binding. You can just pip install it, one line of code, then you can import it, and you can eval all the JavaScript you want. All right, it's quite easy. The only requirement is to have a pip older than 8.1, and that's it. So the problem, V8 is C++. All right, so how do we run C++ in Python? That's not obvious. We needed some kind of binding between the C++ world and the Python world. So anyway, who needs binaries today? Why don't we just do plain Python? I think you have all heard of these packages. Who has used one of these packages at least? Tarek? No. Okay. So yeah, okay. Everyone is using one of these packages. All of these packages are using binary, and so they all do some kind of C or C++ or binary binding anyway at some point. Okay. So it's possible. We know we can do it. Everyone does it. So there is no reason we could not do it. All right. Let's start with that. So what are our goals as a team, as an engineering team, as a developer team who wants to build that? We want to minimize the maintenance, okay? We want something that works out of the box for most of our users. We want to make the setup easy. We want to make the testing easy. We want to have great performances, and we want to have a memory footprint that would be as low as possible, all right? We are not a 2,000 people company. We are a very restricted team. This team was Boris and I, actually, at the time. And so we didn't have like 6 months to ship it. It was more like 3 weeks. So we wanted to have something built as fast as possible. So obviously the development time was a constraint. The other goal that does not appear in it, but which is obvious to us, is stability, security, and performance. All right, that's obviously what we needed because this thing ran on servers. So what are the choices you have as a Python developer today? Many of them, all right? All of these things allow you to build binary extensions, all right, in some way. So CPython, that's the core library of Python, okay? If you like apt-get install python-dev, you will get all the Python headers. Each time you develop Python, you compile a Python extension that uses the CPython API, it will use the Python headers, and it will work like that. So it's built into Python. That's a very good point. It's very Pythonic because it's the Python API, so it's very easy to use as well. And it's not Python version independent, because if you built something for Python 2.7 and you want to use it in 3.x, well, obviously the headers may change, and so you need to recompile it. There is no binary compatibility. It's not open to other languages. You build something with that, you have to use it with Python, because obviously you included the Python headers in it. So you have some kind of Python semantic in the objects you build. And it's high throughput capable, so that's a positive point, because yes, you can build like iterators, you can build streams, you can do whatever you want with the Python API. So if you are able to write some code, it will allow you to build very performant applications. Then you have C-types. C-types, it's also built in. It's not very Pythonic because, you know, C-types, it's like a raw interface to C. Okay, you have the C-types like void star, char star, int, float that are represented in C-types. Okay, so you have the C-types that you can use in Python. So it's not Pythonic, but it's Python version independent. That's a good point. It's only C, and all versions of Python have C-types with very compatible API. So you can use it with any Python of any version of Python. It's also open to other languages, all right? If you compile something for C-types, you don't include Python in any way. You only use standard C-types, okay? So if you use it from Python, it's okay, because you have C-types. If you use it from Ruby, for instance, it's okay too, because it's not tied to Python. It just interfaces with the standard C-types. So you can do it in Ruby too, okay? That's something that is appreciable. It's not high throughput capable, or it is, but it's much more complicated to do that than with a CPython extension, because you don't have all the semantic of the internals of Python that you can use from it. Then CFFI, it's not built into Python, all right? You need to pip install CFFI. So that's an external dependency. It's quite Pythonic because it can use the Python header files too. Python version independent, yes it is, you rely on CFFI. It's open to other languages, obviously, because CFFI allow you to do Ruby, Node, whatever. And high throughput capable because of the way CFFI interfaces with Python. Then Cython, on the previous talk, some of you knew Python, so that's you know the like a meta language that you add on top of Python and allow you to like customize your Python to compile it into something else. So not built in, it's quite Pythonic because it's Python, iThroughput capable. And last but not least, you have Swig, which is extremely common, that everyone, a lot of very, very common libraries use. So that's another option. The choice we've made is C-types. All right, so it was given our schedule, the choice that appeared to be the most relevant to us, because you do not rely on a specific version of Python. Okay, so you can compile your object once, and it will run with all versions of Python. It's a huge win of time because you don't have to test it extensively with all the different versions of Python. You have only one object, so if you test it once, you know that your binary object is validated. All the interface is written using C-types. C-types, you have the same code for 2.7 to 3.6, so it's extremely easy to write something that is portable and that can be used everywhere. So this is why we have chosen it across all of these different choices. Furthermore, it's built into Python. Okay, so since what we ship is public and we want it to be easily installable, you don't rely on a third-party library. So as I said, the binary is Python independent, so it works with all versions of Python. And as of today, we are planning to use it with Ruby. All right, so the same binary object, which we use in Python using C-types, we will use it in Ruby using the Ruby C-types, which is called Fiddler. So that's something that is very appreciable. Okay, we have one binary and we can use it everywhere. So it means we can really know that this binary is bulletproof. There is no tight integration to Python, as I said, with C-types. So no iterator, no context manager. You cannot do that easily in C. You need to have a wrapper in Python that can like simulate these kind of things. Then the syntax is quite complex. All right, you need to write the C-types in Python. You need to have your pointer casting done in Python. All the kind of things you may be used to do in C, you need to learn a new syntax to do it in Python. So it's okay, but you have quite a lot of seg fault if you don't do it right the first time. And that's C-types. That's not C++ types. So we need to write a wrapper from C++ to C in order to be able to use that in C-types. So how does it work? You take a C file, all right? That's really the simpler C file you can imagine. There is no custom syntax. It's really plain C. You compile it, so you get a binary object, basically just a .so shared object. And then you can very simply load it into Python. You import C-types. C-types will DL open this library for you, and as a syntax sugar, will make all the symbols available to you as easily as that, all right? So you can just lib.helloworld, and it will just call the hello world method defined here. So that's really, really simple, and you can do that with any C library that you have on your system. So very easy and very cool to use. Okay, now we know how we are gonna build the extension, what libraries we are gonna use. Now let's build it. So in the end, how will it work? We have like 3 main parts. We have V8, all right? V8, that's a C++ interface. It's the library that is shipped from Google. That's an archive file which is shipped with headers, all right? That's C++ headers, obviously, because V8 is C++. We want, through linking, like compile time, we want to interface it with V8, okay? So we will include v8.h in our file. We will write some wrappers between the C++ V8 code and our C code, and then we can use C types to use this in Python. Okay, so we have these three simple layers: V8, our binding from C++ to C, and our binding to from C to Python. Okay. So how do we put this together? It's very, very simple to build a basic C extension in Python. So you can just put it in your setup.py. You say that you do an extension. If you give it the name of the C file and that you do Python setup.py build, everything is just built. It generates a Python extension. It's extremely simple. In our case, however, it's not that simple because we need to build V8. All right, and V8, I don't know if any of you already built V8, but you need, if you use like the Google script to do that, it will git checkout V8, that's like 800 or 1.2 gigabytes of repository. It will check out the right version, compile it. It's very, very slow, and you need to have a huge bandwidth, so it's quite terrible. So we wanted to abstract this to our users. And but anyway, at some point we need to do it, and we need to do it in a repeatable way. So we need to integrate it into the Python build process. So Boris, take a look at the build process, and in the end, it was looking something like that, right? So it's not very friendly. It's a bit complicated, but if you hook at the right places, you manage to check out stuff, to compile things, and to link it properly in the end. All right. So. I'm not gonna detail that, but you can ask Boris some questions about it if you want. So once you are building this, you may have crashes, for instance, while you write your C code or while you write your C types code. Okay, I don't do bugs. I had to fake these stack traces. Okay, so. If you run me.py here, you see that's a typical Python stack trace. Okay, you have all C these kind of things. All right. So if we compare it with a C stack trace, faked again, obviously, what do we have? Program terminated with signal stack stop aborted. We don't know which file it is. We don't know what happened. We have zero information. So we need to go deeper, indeed. And so we need to really take a look on what's happening behind the scenes. So that's how we get to debug binaries, all right? So if you encounter this kind of things, you just run a ulimit-c unlimited. You run your program again, and then it will crash with a slightly different message, all right? It will tell you core dumped. If you look into the cores directory, you will find the core files that are related to this. This core file, you can see, is quite huge, 700 megabytes. That's because your operating system is recording all of the memory that is used, that the program is using. So later, you can use this core file for analysis and dig whatever you need into this memory. So then we need to read it. Okay, so you can use LLDB or GDB depending on your more C-long or GCC guy. And you can use the BT command, which will give you the backtrace. All right, so after this, we can get a lot of information, and you have information that is similar to what you had in Python. In this case, what can we see? You have your C code on top. That's the place where the crash did occur. And in the bottom, you have the Python code. Okay, you can see you have an object call, which is a well-known internal Python method. If you are on OS X, you have a quick shortcut here. You can take a look in the crash reporter directories that record all the information about the program that crashed in your machine. So you can get some surprises seeing what crashed, and you can get some basic information without having to do the ulimit stuff. Anyway, the ULimit stuff will help you to dig further in a way better way than this. So then, if you are here today, I believe that you have already done some C code. So which of you are GCC user? All right, which of you are C-Lang users? Okay. So a bit less. And anyone's using something else? No one. So I will discuss a bit about C-Lang. You noticed I'm a former Apple guy. C-Lang is from Apple, so that's a bit maybe an issue I have. But there are a lot of things that are great in C-Lang and that help you during developing these kind of things. So we are going to discuss it a bit. So what are the kind of issues we can face when we use C code? One of these is memory leaks. All right. In Python, no matter what, the memory leaks are quite limited. You have a garbage collector, so you can have recurrent issues. You can have trouble with memories, but usually it's not as bad as it is in C. So yeah, when you call a leaking C function from Python, if you do it once, it's okay. If you do it in an iterative way, and if it happens a lot of time during the life of your program, then you'll get trouble. Because if this function leaks and you leak it, and you call it like multiple times, it will leak, and you will crash your process because it will run out of memory. So there are two ways to detect memory leaks. You can use Valgrind, which is well known and very easy to use. Just Valgrind in your program, and it will output the list of the memory that you forgot to read. And you can also use C-Lang Analyzer. So you just use your regular compilation line, you add -- analyze to it, and C-Lang will show you extremely smart reports about what happened in your application. I mean, in your code. That's statically, it's done at compile time, but it has extremely interesting insights about all of this. After that, obviously, hopefully, you have no more memory leaks. All right? Other memory issues. So, memory leaks, that's one thing, okay? You can have other things. Valgrind can help you find things like use after free. So you use a variable that was freed. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't. It depends on the memory layout of your program. It leads to very, very tricky bug to debug. Non-underlined accesses, uninitialized accesses, all these kind of things, Valgrind will help you with. And you can also use the C-Lang address sanitizer. That's a project that was pushed by Google for Chrome. And if you compile your program with Azan, this time it will perform a regular executable object, and when you run it, it will add a lot of wrappers around everything that is related to memory accesses. And this way you will be dynamically informed of what wrong happened during the runtime of your program. Like you have a write out of bounds, you have a double free, and many, many information. That's reduced the speed of the program by maybe 2, so it's not good to use in production, but it's extremely useful to use during development. So then, you ship C code, right? So you don't want to have something that fails, and so maybe you want to take some checks to the next level, right? So the Clang Analyzer, you can have it in your build system, okay? Like at each commit or at each pull request, you have it running, and you have some warning, maybe on GitHub, on your CI, that tells you, all right, you need to check this because there is a warning here. Then you can also fuzz your program. Who is familiar with fuzzing? All right, so fuzzing, it's a bit complicated to fuzz a program. It's a lot of time, all right? So you won't do it all the time, but you have an excellent fuzzer that is called American Fuzzy Lop. If you're interested in fuzzing and artificial intelligence, you should really take a look at it. It's something that is fascinating. It found some huge bugs in many popular open source projects, so that's something that's very interesting. Again, built by a guy at Google and used internally to fuzz a lot of things. So that's very fun to do fuzzing, but obviously that's something you want to do in the end, right? Maybe not do if you don't have time. If you do all that we have discussed first, that's already excellent security measures and quality measures for your code. Then you are building something in C, all right? But you are building it also in Python, so it's painful to do unit testing in C, but it's cool in Python. So you need to rely on Python, and you have a great interface because you build it using C types. So please abuse Python to do unit testing. You can do a lot of things that you would never have the time to do in C. For instance, you can test multi-threading capabilities. Import thread the start, and you can easily try to test your program with a lot of multi-threading code. You can test for memory leaks in Python also, because you can like read the memory of your program, execute your library a couple times, and compare with the memory that was run previously. And obviously you can also test for performance and performance regressions. Very easy to build in Python, so complicated to build in C. So if you do these kind of things, you have the chance to be using Python, so rely on Python and use it. All right, it's built. It has no more memory leaks, it has great performance, it's tested. Now we want to ship it to our customers, right? So who has already seen something like that? Tarek? Okay. Yeah, obviously. So you can find a lot of issues with program packages that embed C extensions. That's what we have all seen. You always miss like the libxml header, you have the wrong OpenSSL version, whatever. You always have trouble when you set up things like that, all right? So no matter how stable our library is, we don't want to ship it like that. We need a bit more work. So all the packages we have seen, they rely on C and C++ code. So they need to build this code. Building this code is done during the pip install, and this is when you get these failures. So let's take a step back on the Python packaging history. What about it? In 2004, Python 2.4, who remembers, the sdist was born. All right, so that's source distribution along with the eggs that allow you to distribute like a build program, okay? And we need to wait 2012 to get wheels that allow you to ship a binary version of your program, okay? So a built version of your program. The wheels were working very well for OS X and Windows. Who uses OS X or Windows on production? I don't. I think you don't, or not much. So yes, and that's in 2016 that the many Linux wheels were born. Okay, so in 2016, at least you have been able to do pip install a binary package in Linux, and this package would be downloaded already compiled from PyPy. So that's the best way to set up things on a Linux. So that's a Python standard. Maybe it's not 5.13, I believe it's 5.03. There may be a typo here. I apologize about this. So if you have a mini Linux wheel, it's compatible on most real-world Linux. All right, so you can like use it on most versions of Debian, most versions of Ubuntu that will that are in real-world systems. The issue is that it's only pip after 8.1. If you have an older pip, it will rely on the source version and try to build your extension by itself. If you use many Linux wheel, you need to build your extension on all the platforms you want to ship it. All right? If you want to ship it for Windows, you need to build it for Windows, 32 bits, 64 bits. If you want to ship it on Darwin, OS 10, then you need to compile it for OS 10. It's quite tricky because you can have mismatch between the configuration of the version of your OS and the version of your local Python. So you need to be very careful about that. And the best thing is, for Linux, you need to build this distribution with CentOS 5, right? You need to build your package with CentOS 5. Who has ever used CentOS 5? Okay, okay. Which version of Python? Not you, Boris. 2.4? 2.4. So that's a bit old. It's 2007. So that's a really old Linux distribution, and it's not easy to build modern things on this. Hopefully and thankfully, the PEP 503 released like Docker images of CentOS 5 with all the modern Python version. So you're able to use it and to compile your things on these Docker images. So wheels or compiler depends on how you want how easy you want to make the life of your users. The wheels, that's ISO builds. You build the binary, you push the binary, and all of your users will use the same binary. So if you have a bug report, you will be able to reproduce it with the same binary. You will be able to see where it crashed, what happened. But you need to maintain many packages, all right? 32 bits, 64 bits, maybe ARM, Intel, Windows, Linux, Darwin, whatever. So that's a bit painful. If you do the compiler things, so that's one build per user, which is not a good thing because you cannot reproduce everything, but you only submit one package and you rely on your users to build it successfully. Of course, it's harder to install, and in our case, it means you need to download V8, build V8, so that's like hours or minutes, long minutes of work before it actually works. So, I said wheels, it's many packages. The question is, how many? Like 2.x, let's say 2.7, right? Wide Unicode, regular Unicode, that's the two standard for Python builds. 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, then you can have Linux, maybe 32, 64 bits, maybe ARM 32, ARM 64, macOS 32, 64, maybe Windows 32, 64, now we have Windows on ARM. It's a lot. So it's like 20 wheels you want to publish, all right? So Travis CI can help you a lot about this. It has a lot of build capabilities and can help you generate a lot of binaries, but that's still quite painful, right? So yes, you need help on this. It's not the funniest way of releasing a Python package. So wheels or compiler. The preferred way is to publish the wheels because it's so easy for your users to set up. But you also want to publish the non-compiled version, and this allows you to do things lean. All right, you can just build for some version of Linux and maybe the last version of OS 10. The users that are not able to use it, Pip is smart enough to download the source repository and to try to build it yourself, all right? So if you have users complaining, then you can go ahead and build maybe for Windows, maybe for old versions of OS 10, whatever. So obviously we have chosen the wheel way because we need to have something extremely simple for our users to ship. So then why does the wheel require CentOS 5? That's because a compiled program relies on third-party libraries that are found on the operating system, like the libc or the standard C++ library. If you have a program that is compiled with libc 2.1, it won't be able to run with libc 2.20. So it means that in many cases, a program that you built on Ubuntu 16 will not be able to run on Ubuntu 14, all right? Depends on what kind of structures you use in your libc, but that's the story behind this. And so CentOS 5 as one of the oldest C library that you can find on the landscape of Unix distribution. This is why P503 requires you to set this up on CentOS 5. So any Linux distribution that will have a libc that is more recent than CentOS 5 will be happy with your compiled object. But you have no need to comply, all right? It said in PEP 503, okay, you need to use CentOS 5. If you don't do it, you can still ship and release your build. It's okay. Just if you have all Linux users, they won't be able to use your will. And that's the URL to the Docker images that the PEP gives to its users. And then we want to test the binaries. All right, so the wheels have been built on our Linux. You need to test it on other distributions, and in this case, you can get a great help from Docker. For instance, with this simple command, you can test your wheel on a lot of Ubuntu distributions. So please rely on this and test extensively. The test matrix can become very, very large very quickly because maybe you have other dependency in your project you want to test it against. But in many, many cases, Docker is of great help. And that's it.